Margaret Dunbar woke up at 5 in the morning because she always did. Not an alarm. Her body had its own clock, wound tight by decades of early school bells and a husband who believed that sleeping past sunrise was a form of moral weakness. Roy had been gone for 47 years, but the clock remained. She supposed some things just stayed. She made coffee in the kitchen of a house that was too quiet and too big for one person, and she stood at the window and watched the October sky turn from black to the color of an old bruise. Rain was coming. She could feel it in the left knee, the one she'd had replaced 6 years ago, the one that was now more reliable than any weather app she'd ever downloaded on the phone her granddaughter had given her. She dressed carefully. Her good coat. Her good shoes, even though good shoes and rain made for a foolish combination. She was going somewhere that required the good coat, and she was not the kind of woman who made exceptions to that rule based on weather. On the kitchen table was a shoebox. Inside the shoebox, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed at the edges, was a folded flag. The flag was a perfect triangle, tight and precise, the way they fold them at military funerals, the way the sergeant had pressed it into her hands on a February afternoon in 1953 while she stood in the cold with a baby on her hip and a sound in her ears that she later realized was her own breathing, very loud, because everything else had gone completely silent. She put the shoebox in a Kroger bag. She put the Kroger bag in her purse. She locked the house and got in the Buick and drove 2 hours north on a road that went straight and flat through fields that had finished their year and lay brown and patient under the gray sky. She was going to fix something. The Regional Veterans Affairs Administration building on Cumberland Avenue was a government building the way all government buildings are government buildings. Square. Beige. A flag out front. A sign near the entrance that listed the office hours and the things you needed to bring and the things that would happen if you didn't bring those things. Margaret had brought everything. She'd brought it in a folder with labeled tabs, because she had been a schoolteacher for 31 years and she understood that organized paperwork was the only language that moved slowly moving systems. The young man at the front desk was polite. He had a name tag that said Kevin and the careful, practiced patience of someone trained to deliver bad news in a neutral tone. He looked at her folder. He looked at his computer screen. He told her, very kindly, that walk-in appointments for pension processing were not available on Tuesdays. That she would need to schedule an appointment through the online portal, or call the main hotline, and that the earliest available appointment was 3 weeks out. Margaret looked at him. She said, "Young man, my pension has been suspended for 3 months due to an error your office made. I am 71 years old. I drove 2 hours to be here. I would like to speak with someone who can correct this today." Kevin looked at his screen again. He looked genuinely sorry. The system, he explained, was the system. She went outside. The rain started about 20 minutes after she sat down on the marble steps. Not hard rain. The kind that doesn't commit, that falls steadily and without drama and gets into everything anyway. The kind of rain that is somehow worse than a downpour because there is nothing exciting about it. It is just wet and cold, and it continues. There was a plastic lawn chair near the entrance. A younger man with a prosthetic leg and a clipboard was already sitting in it, filling out forms with the focused energy of someone who had learned to do important things in inconvenient circumstances. He glanced up at her. She nodded at him. He nodded back. Two people who understood the particular quiet that comes from waiting for a system to notice you. Margaret held her purse in both hands and stood on the steps and let the rain spot the shoulders of her good coat. Inside the purse was the shoebox. Inside the shoebox was Roy. Not Roy. She knew that. 47 years had given her plenty of time to understand the difference between a folded piece of fabric and a person. But she had carried that flag to every important thing since 1953, without quite being able to explain why, the way you carry a habit long past the point where it makes rational sense, because stopping would feel like losing something twice. She was there because the pension, Roy's pension, the one the government had been sending her every month for 47 years as its way of acknowledging what had been taken, had simply stopped. A letter had arrived in July explaining that a coding error had caused an administrative suspension of her benefits and that the matter would be resolved in processing. It was now October. Nothing had been resolved. The hotline had a hold time of 2 hours and 18 minutes, at the end of which a woman had told her to go in person to her regional office. She was in person at her regional office. She was standing in the rain. She did not think about this in dramatic terms. She was not a dramatic person. She thought about it the way she thought about most things, which was to look at it clearly, without flinching, and decide what to do next. She had been doing this since she was 24 years old, and a man in a uniform had knocked on her door on the worst Valentine's Day in recorded history. She would stand here. Someone would eventually see her. Something would eventually move. She had buried harder days than this. The black sedan pulled to the curb at 9:47, and Margaret watched it the way she watched everything, which was with the patient attention of a woman who had learned that most things reveal themselves if you simply wait. The man who got out was 60, maybe a year or two past that, with the kind of build that used to be described as solid and still was. He wore his uniform the way certain men wear things they've earned, not with pride exactly, but with a kind of settled ownership, as if the clothes and the person had long since agreed on what they were together. 4 stars on his shoulders. A face that had been made plain and permanent by weather and decisions. He had an aide behind him, a younger man with a phone and a portfolio, already moving toward the building's entrance. The general, because those stars made him a general, Margaret had learned the ranks the way you learn the alphabet, necessary and permanent, paused at the base of the steps. He looked at her. Not the building. Not past her. At her, the way people look when they are actually seeing and not just registering. He looked at the purse held in both hands. The good coat, rain-spotted at the shoulders. The shape of the shoebox inside the Kroger bag, that unmistakable triangle pressing against the plastic. He stopped. He came to attention. Not casual attention. Full attention, heels together, spine straight, chin level, the kind of posture that does not come from good intentions but from 10,000 repetitions over 40 years. He raised his right hand to his brow and held it there. He saluted her. Not the building. Not the flag he could not see. Not some tradition performed in the direction of an old woman. Her. Margaret Eloise Dunbar, of Harlan County, Tennessee, widow of Sergeant First Class Roy Allen Dunbar, standing in the rain on marble steps with her good coat and her Kroger bag, and 31 years of teaching other people's children and 47 years of learning how to carry a thing that never got lighter. He saluted her, and he held it, and 3 seconds is longer than it sounds when someone means it. She stood straighter. She didn't decide to. Her spine simply responded to something old and known. He lowered his hand. He walked up the steps. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the rain beginning to spot his uniform too, and he said, in the voice of a man who had given orders in difficult places and understood that the most important orders were sometimes very quiet, "Ma'am. Why are you standing in the rain?" She told him all of it. She was not a woman who told strangers her troubles. She had been raised in a tradition that considered this a form of weakness, a spilling of things that should be kept contained and managed privately. But something about the way he asked, not with the professional sympathy of someone trained to receive complaints, but with the full attention of someone who genuinely needed to understand, made her tell him. The pension. The 3 months. The coding error. The letter that explained nothing useful. The hotline and the 2 hours and 18 minutes and the woman at the end of it who had told her to come in person. Kevin with his name tag and his neutral tone and the system that was the system. The rain. She told it plainly, without emotion in her voice, the way you describe a problem when you have had enough time with it that it has stopped being upsetting and started being simply a fact that needs correcting. He listened with his whole body. She noticed that. Some people listen with their faces and somewhere else with the rest of themselves, half present, processing what they'll say next. He was entirely there. She thought she had perhaps only known 2 or 3 people in her life who listened that way, and Roy had been one of them, and she pushed that thought back down to where it belonged. When she finished, he said, "Will you come inside with me?" Not, "I'll take care of this." Not, "Don't you worry." Not any of the reassuring phrases that people use when they want credit for a solution they haven't found yet. He asked if she would come inside with him. As if they were 2 people solving a problem together and she had an equal say in the matter. She said yes. What happened next moved faster than she had believed such things could move. There was a conference room. There was coffee, bad but warm, which she accepted gratefully. There were 2 staffers who appeared within minutes, both carrying tablets, both with the focused expressions of people who understood that the temperature of the room had changed and that the appropriate response was speed. There was Kevin from the front desk, who arrived looking pale in the way of a person who has just learned that the stranger he sent outside to stand in the rain had returned with a 4-star general. She did not feel satisfied by Kevin's paleness. She was not that kind of person. General Thomas W. Herrick, which was his name, which she learned from the nameplate on his portfolio, sat across from her at the conference table and was present for all of it. He did not delegate and leave. He did not make a phone call and consider his obligation discharged. He sat in the chair and he watched while people found the coding error, documented the coding error, corrected the coding error, and began the process of returning to Margaret Dunbar the money that had always been hers. He did not check his phone. He did not look at his watch. He sat there with her the way you sit with someone when you have decided, for reasons you do not explain and do not need to explain, that there is nowhere else you should be. The pension was reinstated before noon. A formal letter of apology would be mailed within the week. The back payment for 3 months would be processed on an expedited schedule. Kevin said all of this with the careful diction of someone reading from a script he had just written in his head very quickly. Margaret listened. She said thank you, because that was the appropriate thing to say, and she meant it, because she was not a person who said things she didn't mean. The staffers left. Kevin left. The aide hovered at the door and then, reading something in the general's posture, stepped back into the hallway and pulled the door most of the way closed. The room was quiet. The coffee had gone cold. The shoebox sat on the table between them, the Kroger bag folded back, the rubber bands off, the tissue paper pushed aside, the flag showing at the corner of the lid. The general looked at it the way people look at things they recognize. He said, "Was your husband Army?" "He was," Margaret said. "Korea." "Chosin Reservoir." February of '53. He was quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable quiet. The other kind. "We don't say their names enough," he said. She looked at him across the table. She had heard many things said about the war, about Roy, about sacrifice and service and gratitude, in 47 years of widowhood. She had heard speeches and readings and the particular careful language of ceremony. She had heard all the correct things said in all the correct ways. She had not heard that. "Roy Allen Dunbar," she said. "Sergeant First Class." He looked at her directly. He said it back to her. Roy Allen Dunbar. 2 words and a rank. The simplest possible sentence. And yet she felt something in her chest move that had not moved in a very long time, something that had been held in one position for so long it had nearly forgotten it could shift. She thought, this man has said Roy's name the way Roy deserved to have his name said. Without performance. Without the careful reverence of someone handling something fragile. Just his name, spoken like it belonged in the present tense, like it was allowed to exist here in this conference room with its bad coffee and its carpet cleaner smell, on an ordinary Tuesday morning in October. Like Roy himself was allowed to exist here. Still. After all this time. She drove home in the early afternoon, on the same road that went straight and flat through the finished fields. The heater worked on the left side only. The shoebox rode in the passenger seat. The back payment would come in 2 to 3 weeks, the letter would arrive before that, and the coding error was corrected and would not happen again, or so they had said, and she believed them, or she chose to. She passed the gas station at the county line where she sometimes stopped for coffee on long drives. She did not stop today. She drove through it and kept going, and she was 2 miles past it when the thing she had been holding for the length of the drive finally came loose. She cried the way she had learned to cry since Roy, which was briefly and without sound, the way water finds a crack and moves through it quickly and is gone. She cried for 3 or 4 minutes on a flat road with nothing on either side, and then she was done, and she drove the rest of the way home in the ordinary gray light of a Tuesday afternoon. She said his name once, out loud, to the car. Not to his photograph, which was on the mantel at home. Not to the flag, which sat in the passenger seat. Just out loud, into the air, into the particular silence of a car moving through countryside that did not care either way. Roy. 1 syllable. 1 man. 1 Valentine's Day that she had never gotten back and had never asked anyone to return because asking would not have changed it. She had carried him in her mouth like that for 47 years. Quietly. In moments when no one was watching. She had said his name to the garden in the spring when things came back after winter, and to the sky on cold clear nights that reminded her of Korea in the way that all cold clear nights did, and sometimes to the students in her classroom who would never know why their teacher occasionally looked out the window in February with an expression they could not name. She had said his name to keep him present. Today, a man with 4 stars on his shoulders had said it too. She did not know Thomas Herrick. She would likely never see him again. He was a general and she was a retired schoolteacher from Harlan County, and their lives had overlapped for exactly one Tuesday morning in October, and that was probably all they were ever going to get. But he had looked at her on those steps in the rain. He had stopped when most people would have kept moving. He had asked her a question and then listened to the whole answer, and he had sat with her until the thing was fixed, and then he had said Roy's name the way Roy's name deserved to be said, without prompting, without being asked, as if he understood without explanation that some debts are owed not to the living but to the people we carry with us. She pulled into the driveway of her house. She sat in the car for a moment. The rain had stopped somewhere around mile 40 and the sky to the west had opened into a thin, pale light, the kind that shows up late in the day as if to apologize for the earlier weather. She picked up the shoebox from the passenger seat. She held it for a moment the way she always held it, with both hands, the way you hold something that has no replacement. Then she got out of the car, and she went inside, and she put the kettle on, and she sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to her granddaughter, who was 16 and did not always understand why history mattered or why old things needed to be remembered or why one man's name from 1953 was worth carrying through all the decades that came after. She did not explain all of that in the letter. She was a schoolteacher. She knew that the best lessons are the ones students arrive at themselves. She just told the girl what had happened. The rain. The steps. The general. The name. And at the bottom of the letter, in the careful print she had used for 31 years on blackboards in small Tennessee classrooms, she wrote, ***, his name was Roy Allen Dunbar. Remember it, ***.